My dad lied about my 175K being gone. The bank statement told a completely different story. It wasn't just gone, it was transferred. And not to some anonymous investment firm or a phantom charity. It was transferred, a cool $175,000 straight into my brother's personal account, a week before Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. My brother, Mark, the golden child, the one who always had a way with Dad, the one who effortlessly glided through life on a tide of inherited privilege. And me? I was the one left holding the bag, the one who'd been told, with that same patronizing sigh my father reserved for my perceived failures, that my money was gone, a casualty of his generosity to my struggling sibling. The words still echoed in my head sometimes, sharp and clear even now. "Honey, I'm so sorry," he'd said, his voice laced with that practiced sympathy that always felt like a performance. Mark was in a real bind, had some bad luck with a business venture. I had to step in. Your 175K, well, it was the only way to keep things afloat. You understand, don't you? Family first. He'd even placed a hand on my arm, a gesture that used to feel reassuring, but now felt like a brand. My 175K. My college savings, painstakingly accumulated through years of working weekends at that diner, of passing up spring break trips with friends, of saying no to that cute little convertible I'd had my eye on. It was my safety net, my down payment for a future I'd carefully mapped out, and he'd just given it away. To Mark. At the time, I believed him, or rather, I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too ugly to contemplate. The alternative was that my father, the man who'd built his empire from scratch, the man who preached fiscal responsibility and the value of hard work, would lie to me, his own daughter, for the benefit of his favorite son. So I swallowed the bitter pill. I faked a smile, nodded my head, and managed a week. Of course, Dad, family first. But inside, something shifted. A tiny, hard knot of resentment began to form, invisible to everyone but me. I remember the holidays that year. Thanksgiving felt like a sham. Mark was there, of course, beaming, his usual boisterous self, holding court at the head of the table. He'd even winked at me across the cranberry sauce, a gesture I now understand was pure, unadulterated mockery. He knew. He had to have known. He'd been in on it. My mother was there too, of course. She was always there, a silent presence in the grand house, her life a carefully curated performance of domestic bliss. She'd patted my hand, her own smile tight, her eyes never quite meeting mine. She was a master of avoidance, of smoothing over rough edges, of maintaining the facade of perfect family harmony. She'd always been more of a diplomat than a confidant, mediating between my father and my brother, and often between my father and me. I'd always envied Mark his easy relationship with her, the way she seemed to genuinely delight in his every achievement, while I was always the one who needed gentle redirection, who had to be reminded of my responsibilities. That $175,000 had been my escape route. I'd been working at a small local law firm for a few years, gaining experience, building my own clientele, but the pay was meager. My dream was to open my own practice, a boutique firm specializing in family law, helping people navigate the messy, emotional waters I was beginning to see so clearly. That money was the seed capital, the buffer I needed to make the leap. Without it, the dream felt like it was dissolving, a mirage in the desert. I was supposed to be saving for a down payment on a small office space, maybe even a modest apartment of my own, something separate from the suffocating comfort of my childhood home, where my father still treated me like a child, even at 28. The conversation with my father had happened a few weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd stopped by his sprawling estate in the Hamptons, a place that always felt more like a museum than a home, to discuss my plans. I'd brought a binder, meticulously organized, with market research, projected expenses, and a solid business plan. I'd been so excited, so full of hope. He'd listened, or at least he'd made the motions of listening, his eyes often drifting to the stock tickers on the massive screen in his study. When I'd finally finished, breathless with anticipation, he'd leaned back in his leather chair, steeples his fingers, and delivered the blow. "That's all very admirable, Sarah," he'd said, his voice smooth as polished mahogany. "But frankly, it's not the time. Mark's got some significant financial challenges right now. He's a good son. He's always been there for us, and I need to support him. You, on the other hand, you're young, you've got a career, you can always rebuild. Mark needs this now. I remembered the feeling of my stomach plummeting. But Dad, I'd stammered, my voice suddenly thin. That money, that's my money. I saved it. He'd waved a dismissive hand. A technicality, my dear. It was in an account that was technically under my management. Think of it as a loan, a very generous, interest-free loan to your brother from his sister, a demonstration of your family values. Family values. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I'd left his study that day feeling hollowed out, the binder of my dreams suddenly heavy and useless. I'd driven back to my small apartment, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. I'd called my best friend, Emily, sobbing into the phone, recounting the conversation. Emily, bless her practical heart, had been furious on my behalf. That's unbelievable, Sarah. He can't just do that. It's your money. He's my father, Em, I'd whispered, the words tasting like ash. And it's his money, technically. I let him set up that account when I was younger for safekeeping. A convenient loophole, expertly exploited. The next few months were a blur of quiet desperation. I tried to pick up the pieces, to salvage my dream, but without that seed money, it felt impossible. I doubled down at the law firm, taking on extra cases, working late into the night. I lived even more frugally than before, cutting out every possible expense. But the sheer scale of the financial hole felt insurmountable. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to be doing just fine. He'd bought a new sports car, a sleek, expensive model I'd seen him driving around town. He'd taken a lavish trip to Aspen, posting endless photos on social media of him shussing down powdery slopes and toasting with champagne. The contrast was galling. I avoided my father as much as possible. Holidays became a minefield of forced cheerfulness and carefully orchestrated conversations. My mother would try to bridge the gap, her gentle inquiries about my work feeling like probing questions. Are you happy, dear? Your father worries about you. You seem a little stressed. I'm fine, Mom, I'd reply, my smile plastered on. Just busy. The truth gnawed at me. The injustice festered. Every time I saw Mark, his carefree demeanor, his casual pronouncements about his latest investment opportunities, I felt a surge of something dark and dangerous. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a cold, calculating fury. I started digging. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just accept this as the way things were. I began subtly questioning my father about his finances, about how he managed his various accounts, about the loan to Mark. He was always vague, always deflecting, always circling back to the same narrative of Mark's struggles and my supposed understanding. Then, a little over a year ago, an opportunity presented itself. My father was in the hospital for a minor procedure, nothing serious, but it meant he was out of commission for a few days. His usual iron grip on his empire loosened. He'd always been meticulous about his paperwork, his financial records kept in pristine order in his home office, a room I'd always been forbidden to enter. Now, with his estate manager out of town and my mother flustered by the hospital visits, there was a window, a small, risky window. I told my mother I was going to the estate to check on things, to make sure the household staff was managing. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. I brought a thermos of coffee, a plate of cookies, and the air of a dutiful daughter. While my mother was distracted by a phone call from the doctor, I slipped away. The study door, usually locked, was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was either going to give me the answers I craved, or it was going to be the end of me. The room smelled of old leather, expensive cigars, and secrets. His desk was immaculate, as always. I knew I couldn't spend long, couldn't risk leaving any trace of my presence. I started with the obvious places, the desk drawers, the filing cabinets. It was overwhelming, a labyrinth of financial documents, legal papers, and correspondence. I was looking for anything that pertained to the transfer of my money, any record of funds moving from my account to Mark's. I'd even brought a small, discreet USB drive, just in case. And then I found it. Tucked away in a thick manila folder labeled Mark Personal Investments, beneath a stack of recent bank statements for his various shell corporations, was a statement from a private bank. Not one I recognized. It was dated from just a few weeks before that fateful Thanksgiving. And there, in black and white, clear as day, was a transaction. $175,000. Transfer from my name, to Mark's account, the exact amount, the exact date. My hands started to shake so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. It was real. He had lied. Both of them. My father with his sanctimonious pronouncements, and my mother with her placid acceptance. Mark, the beneficiary of their deceit. They hadn't just taken my money, they had actively conspired to deceive me. The humiliation of that Thanksgiving, the forced smiles, the pretense of understanding, it all came crashing back, amplified 1,000-fold. But beneath the anger, something else was stirring. A cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was armed. I copied the statement, every page, onto my USB drive, my fingers flying with a newfound purpose. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, leaving no trace. I walked out of the study, my composure meticulously maintained, my heart a roaring furnace of resolve. My mother was still on the phone, her back to me. I gave her a small, tight smile as I passed her in the hall. "Everything okay, Mom?" I asked, my voice unnervingly steady. She turned, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "Oh, Sarah, thank you. Just sorting things out. Your father will be home soon." "I have to go," I said, already halfway to the door. "Tell him I stopped by. And tell him I'll be in touch." I drove away from the estate that day, the glint of the setting sun on the water doing nothing to warm the ice that had settled in my veins. The $175,000 was gone, yes, but so was my naivete. So was my trust. They thought they had me cornered, had successfully silenced me with their lies and their manipulation. They thought they had crushed my dreams and settled me into a comfortable, unquestioning acceptance of their twisted hierarchy. But they were wrong. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the quiet strength of a woman who had learned to fight for every inch of her own life. They had played their hand, and now it was my turn to deal. The silence that had followed my father's pronouncements was over. The humiliation had sunk deep, but it hadn't broken me. It had forged me. And the realization of their betrayal wasn't a source of despair, but a fuel, a dangerous, exhilarating fuel. I had the proof, I had the truth, and I had a plan. They thought my money was gone. They had no idea how wrong they were. It was just temporarily misplaced, and I was coming to collect. The game had changed, and they, with all their wealth and privilege, were about to learn that some debts, especially those built on deceit, are paid in full, with interest. The initial wave of vindication, the sheer, raw power of holding that bank statement, had been intoxicating. It was a potent antidote to the years of feeling small, insignificant, and utterly duped. I replayed the scene in my mind 1,000 times, my father's study, the scent of old money and betrayal, the damning evidence of his deceit laid bare on his pristine desk. I'd copied it all, every damning detail, every smug misdirection. But then, after the initial rush, the cold dread began to seep in. Knowing was one thing, but acting on that knowledge, especially against my own family, felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. For weeks, I did nothing but watch. I observed them from a distance, like a scientist studying an alien species. Thanksgiving had come and gone, a meticulously orchestrated charade of forced smiles and loaded silences. Mark, predictably, had been the life of the party. He'd regaled everyone with tales of his latest business ventures, vague, grandiose pronouncements about disruptive technologies and leveraging synergistic opportunities. He was tanned, relaxed, and exuded an aura of unearned confidence that curdled my stomach. He wore a new watch, a chunky gold monstrosity that screamed nouveau riche, and a silk shirt that looked suspiciously expensive. He'd caught my eye once, across the crowded living room, and given that familiar, knowing smirk. It wasn't just mockery this time, it was pity. The pity of someone who knows you've been played and is enjoying the spectacle. My mother, bless her placid heart, had been her usual self, a soothing presence, a master of deflection, her existence seemingly dedicated to ensuring that nothing ever truly disturbed the surface of their gilded pond. She'd brought me a plate of my favorite pumpkin scones, her smile a little too bright, her voice a little too chirpy. "Sarah, darling, you look a bit pale. Are you getting enough sleep? Your father worries about you." Her hand had reached out, hovering for a moment as if considering a comforting touch, then retreated, settling on her pearl necklace. It was always like this. She coated everything in a thick layer of saccharine politeness, a shield against any unpleasantness. But beneath that veneer, I knew she was complicit. She knew. She must have. The sheer audacity of the lie, the systematic deception, it couldn't have been a solo performance by my father. I started to piece together the financial architecture of their lives, not just my father's vast empire, but Mark's apparent, albeit questionable, success. I spent hours online, using the skills I'd honed researching legal cases. I looked into Mark's ostensible businesses. They were shadowy, complex, and seemed to exist more on paper than in reality. Shell corporations, holding companies registered in offshore locations, a dizzying web of interconnected entities that made my head spin. It was a smokescreen, designed to obscure, to obfuscate. But the money was real. I'd seen the transfers. Then, a few months ago, something else surfaced. I was still poring over the documents I discreetly copied from my father's study, trying to understand the sheer scope of his financial dealings, when I stumbled upon a series of correspondence related to a trust. Not a trust for my inheritance, not for any of his legitimate business endeavors. This was different. It was a trust established years ago, heavily anonymized, with a beneficiary I didn't recognize. The details were sparse, the language deliberately opaque, but the amounts were staggering, millions. And it was being managed by the same private bank that had handled the transfer of my money to Mark. This was a new layer of deception. My father, the man who lectured us relentlessly on the importance of family legacy and hard-earned wealth, had been secretly funneling vast sums into an anonymous trust for an unknown recipient. Was this some sort of protection racket, hush money, or was it something even more personal, a secret life he'd meticulously kept hidden from his wife and children? The questions began to churn, a new kind of unease settling over me. It wasn't just about my $175,000 anymore. It was about the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father's character, about the very definition of their wealth. The more I dug, the more I realized how carefully I had been excluded from the real machinations of the family fortune. I was the dutiful daughter, the one who worked hard, the one who was supposed to be grateful for scraps. Mark was the heir apparent, the one who was groomed, coddled, and given the keys to the kingdom. But this trust, this felt like a betrayal of a different order, a secret that transcended even the theft of my savings. It suggested a level of manipulation, of control, that went far beyond anything I had imagined. I started to feel a chilling calm descend. The initial rage had begun to morph into something more strategic. I wasn't just looking for retribution anymore. I was looking for leverage. I began to discreetly research the private bank, its history, its clientele. It was notoriously discreet, catering to the ultra-wealthy, individuals who valued privacy above all else. They wouldn't easily part with information, but they also wouldn't risk exposure for shady dealings. If I could prove that the trust was connected to illicit activities, or if the beneficiary was someone my father was trying to keep hidden, I might have something truly potent. I decided to escalate.
I couldn't keep this a secret indefinitely, not without risking someone else discovering it and using it against me. I needed to involve someone who understood the world of finance and legal maneuvering better than I did. I thought of Emily, my best friend. She wasn't family, but she was fiercely loyal and incredibly sharp. She was also a corporate lawyer, working at a high-powered firm in Manhattan. She'd always been my sounding board, my confidant, and my most ardent defender. I arranged to meet her for lunch in a small, discreet cafe in a quiet part of the city, far from any of our family's usual haunts. The air in the cafe was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and baking bread, a welcome contrast to the sterile opulence of my family's world. Emily arrived, her usual vibrant energy a comforting presence. She'd put on a few pounds since her wedding last year, and she wore her hair a little shorter, framing a face that was both intelligent and kind. "Sarah, you look intense," she said, sliding into the booth opposite me. "Everything okay?" I took a deep breath, the cafe's normalcy a fragile buffer against the storm brewing inside me. It's complicated, Em. Remember that money my dad took? The $175,000? Emily's expression immediately hardened. Of course I remember. I was furious. Did you find out more? I did, I said, my voice low. He lied. Completely. He transferred it directly to Mark. And it turns out that's just the tip of the iceberg. I told her everything about the private bank, the trust, the millions, the anonymous beneficiary. I laid out the documents I had, the bank statement, the trust filings, the limited correspondence I'd managed to secure. Emily listened, her eyes widening with each revelation, her initial concern hardening into a steely resolve. She didn't interrupt, her gaze fixed on the paper spread across the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, she leaned back, running a hand through her short hair. Wow, Sarah, this is big, like headline news big if it got out the wrong way. Your father has been playing a very dangerous game. I know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He always preached about transparency, about integrity, and all this time he's been hiding millions, funneling it away into what? I don't even know who this beneficiary is. Emily picked up one of the trust documents, her fingers tracing the legal jargon. This is designed to be untraceable. Whoever set this up wanted maximum discretion. The private bank would have rigorous know-your-client protocols, but for this kind of setup, they're likely operating on a nod and a wink. The key here is the bank itself and the connections it has. So what do we do? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. The calm had begun to fray, replaced by a desperate urgency. We need more information, hard facts. We can't go in blind.
Accusing your father of, well, whatever this is, without irrefutable proof is a suicide mission. He'll crush you. He'll discredit you. He'll probably disown you, and Mark will revel in it. Emily paused, her gaze intense. But if we can prove, let's say, financial impropriety, or even illegal activity linked to this trust, we have a weapon, a very powerful weapon. How do we get it? I asked, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. We don't, not directly. We find someone who can get it, someone who has access, or someone who owes your father a favor, or someone who is willing to risk it for a significant payday. This is where it gets tricky and potentially dangerous. Emily looked me straight in the eye. Are you prepared for this, Sarah? This isn't just about getting your $175,000 back. This is about dismantling a carefully constructed facade. It could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, including you. I thought about the years of humiliation, the feeling of being powerless, the quiet resentment that had simmered for so long. I thought about the dream of my own law practice, a dream that had been deferred, then seemingly stolen. I thought about the smug satisfaction on Mark's face, the practiced sympathy of my mother, the cold, calculating deceiver that was my father. I am, I said, the words feeling heavier, more solid than anything I'd spoken in years. I'm more than prepared. I want them to know what they did. I want them to understand that I'm not a victim. I'm a force they've unleashed. Emily nodded, a small, grim smile on her lips. Okay, then we start by digging deeper into the bank's connections. I have a few contacts, people who operate in the gray areas, who might have insights into how these private trusts are managed, and who might be willing to point us in the right direction. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be cheap. But if we're going to play this game, we need to play it to win. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings, encrypted communications, and late-night research sessions. Emily leveraged her network, pulling favors from contacts she'd cultivated over years in the cutthroat legal world. We spoke to former employees of the private bank, whistleblowers, even a disgruntled investment advisor who'd had dealings with my father's family. Information trickled in, fragmented and often contradictory, like pieces of a vast, intricate puzzle. We learned that the private bank had a reputation for facilitating complex offshore structures for high-net-worth individuals, often with questionable backgrounds. The anonymity of the trust was a deliberate design, meant to shield the beneficiary and the source of the funds from scrutiny. But one of Emily's contacts, a sharp-tongued former compliance officer who now works as a consultant, hinted at something more significant.
She mentioned whispers within the bank about a particularly sensitive account, one that required an unusually high level of discretion, even for them. It was rumored to be linked to a prominent but notoriously private industrialist from overseas,
someone who had made a fortune in commodities and had a reputation for ruthless business practices. The name sent a chill down my spine. I vaguely recalled my father mentioning this industrialist once, years ago, in the context of a business deal that had fallen through. He described him as unpredictable and dangerous. Suddenly, the anonymous trust didn't feel like just a secret whim of my father's. It felt like a calculated move, a strategic alliance with potentially far-reaching implications. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This wasn't just about my family's secrets anymore. This was about international finance, about potentially powerful and dangerous individuals. The fear that had been a constant hum beneath my resolve began to intensify. But with it came a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was no longer just a wrong daughter seeking justice. I was a player in a much larger, more complex game. We needed a name, a definitive link between my father, the trust, and this overseas industrialist. Emily's contact suggested a possible route, a former associate of the industrialist, a man who had reportedly fallen out with him and might be willing to talk for the right price. He was a ghost, difficult to track, but Emily's network was relentless. After weeks of searching, they found him. He was living in a small, unassuming town in Florida, trying to disappear. Getting him to speak was another hurdle. He was paranoid, deeply distrustful. He'd already been burned once, he said, and wasn't about to stick his neck out again. Emily, with her calm persistence and carefully chosen words, managed to chip away at his defenses. She appealed to his sense of justice, to the potential for financial reward, and most importantly, to the fact that he wouldn't be the only one bringing down a powerful figure. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a discreet hotel and a nondescript town halfway between us and him. He was older, wiry, with sharp darting eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and apprehension. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies. We sat in a sterile conference room, the air thick with unspoken tension. I kept my voice low, my demeanor calm and professional, channeling my inner litigator. Emily led the questioning, her approach gentle yet probing. Davies was reluctant at first, offering vague confirmations, evasive answers. But when Emily mentioned the specific private bank and the name of the overseas industrialist, he flinched. That name, he rasped, his voice dry and scratchy. That man, he ruined me, took everything I had.
"We believe your father may have been involved with him," Emily said, her voice steady. "Through a trust. A significant amount of money was involved." Davies' eyes narrowed, a flicker of something sharp and dangerous igniting within them. "Involved? He was facilitating. Your father? He was the cleaner. He made the money disappear, made problems vanish. For a price, of course." My breath hitched. Cleaner. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. My father, the pillar of the community, the man who lectured us on morality, was laundering money for a notorious international figure. "You mean the money my father was funneling into that trust? It wasn't his?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Davies let out a dry, humorless chuckle. His? No, he was a conduit, a very well-compensated conduit. He built his empire on a foundation of helping people like my former associate move their assets discreetly. That trust you found? It was one of many, designed to hide funds from tax authorities, from law enforcement, from anyone who might ask too many questions. He paused, taking a long drag from an imaginary cigarette. "And your $175,000? That wasn't a loan to your brother. That was just housekeeping, a payment, to keep the operation running smoothly, a small fee to ensure your father's continued cooperation. He wouldn't have dared touch that money without authorization. It wasn't his to give." The room seemed to tilt. The ground beneath my feet vanished. My father hadn't just lied about my money. He'd stolen it as a payment, a bribe, a transaction in a criminal enterprise. The golden child, Mark, the beneficiary of his father's deceit, he was just a pawn, an unwitting recipient of funds that were never meant to be theirs. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The humiliation wasn't just about my father's favoritism. It was about my money being used to grease the wheels of international crime. My carefully constructed resolve, the cold fury I'd nurtured, threatened to shatter. This was so much bigger, so much darker than I could have ever imagined. The image of my father, lecturing me on responsibility, on the value of hard work, was now a grotesque caricature. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a criminal,
And my mother? She was the unwitting accessory, the queen of denial, presiding over a kingdom built on lies and ill-gotten gains. So, the money my father transferred to Mark? I stammered, trying to process the implications. It wasn't a gift? It wasn't to help him? Davies scoffed. Help him? Please. Your father managed those transfers. It was likely an expense, or a payment for services rendered by Mark, services your father wanted to keep discreet. Or maybe it was just to keep the boy happy, placate him. He had a lot of mouths to feed, financially speaking. And that industrialist, he paid well for silence and cooperation. Your father's job was to keep the whole damn thing invisible.
He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine. You think that trust is the only thing? Your father's entire network, his business dealings, a lot of it runs on that kind of discretion. He made a fortune enabling people like that. And your brother, he's just another piece in the puzzle. They both are. The implication hung in the air, a suffocating weight. My family, the people I had grown up with, the people I had loved, were actively involved in something deeply illegal and morally reprehensible. The power shift I had envisioned, the quiet retribution, now felt naive, almost quaint. I wasn't just confronting a dishonest father. I was potentially exposing a vast criminal operation. I looked at Emily. Her face was a mask of controlled intensity, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. This was far beyond a simple inheritance dispute. This was potentially career-defining for her and life-altering for me. Thank you, Mr. Davies, Emily said, her voice calm and measured. This has been incredibly illuminating. We appreciate your candor. She slid a small, discreet envelope across the table. Davies' eyes flickered towards it, then back to us. He took it, his fingers closing around it with a speed that belied his age. As we drove away from the nondescript town, the Florida sun beating down on the car, a heavy silence fell between Emily and me. The revelation had been too much, too sudden, too profound. My father's lie about my $175,000 was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a symptom of a much larger, much more dangerous disease. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had used my money to fund his criminal activities, to maintain his facade, to keep his dangerous associates happy. He used my money as a payment, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. To keep his operation running? Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. I know, Sarah. It's a lot. But now we know. We know the truth. And with the truth comes power. We just have to figure out how to wield it. But even as she said it, a new wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't just about exposing my father anymore. This was about the people he worked for, the overseas industrialist, the potentially dangerous criminals he associated with. They wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had just opened the door, inviting myself into their dangerous world. I had the proof, yes, but was I strong enough to survive what came next? The quiet resolve had fractured, replaced by a raw, visceral fear. I had gone looking for justice, and I had stumbled into a war, and I had no idea if I would survive it. The game had changed, and I was no longer just playing to win. I was playing to stay alive. The drive back was a hushed, charged silence. The Florida sun, which had seemed so oppressive on the way out, now felt like a distant, mocking presence. Emily's hand, when it occasionally brushed mine, was cool and steady, a stark contrast to the wildfire raging through my veins. I kept replaying Davies' words, each one a hammer blow against the carefully constructed image of my father. Cleaner, conduit, housekeeping. The casual cruelty of it, the utter lack of remorse in his voice, was more chilling than any threat. My inheritance, my future, my sense of self, all had been reduced to a transactional detail in my father's illicit business dealings. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My father hadn't just cheated me, he'd used me, my savings, as collateral, as a petty cash fund for his shadowy enterprises. The sheer audacity of it, the utter contempt for his own flesh and blood, was staggering. Mark, the golden boy, was merely a tool, a recipient of funds meant to maintain the illusion of legitimacy, or perhaps to silence him, to ensure his complicity.
My mother, the oblivious matriarch, was the unwitting warden of a gilded cage, surrounded by secrets she likely chose not to see. When we finally pulled into my apartment building's garage, the mundane normalcy of the surroundings felt surreal. The fluorescent lights hummed, the air smelled of exhaust and damp concrete, a world away from the high-stakes drama we had just exited. I felt like an imposter, a stranger in my own life. "We need a plan, Sarah," Emily said, her voice firm, cutting through the fog of my thoughts. "A real plan. Davies gave us the ammunition, but we have to decide how to fire it." I nodded, leaning my head back against the worn leather of the car seat. The fight was no longer just about reclaiming my money or even about exposing my father's fraud. This was about dismantling an entire ecosystem of deceit. The $175,000 was a drop in the ocean, a single damning piece of evidence that pointed to an iceberg of corruption. "What are our options?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Several," Emily replied, her gaze sharp. "We could go to the authorities, turn over everything we have. That would be the cleanest route, legally speaking, but it would also be the most volatile. Your father's associates, the overseas industrialist, they're not going to take kindly to being investigated. There could be repercussions, serious ones." She paused, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "And there's no guarantee they'll trace it all back to your father directly. He's a professional. He's built layers of protection. And the other option? We use the information ourselves. We leverage it. We go directly to your father. We present him with the evidence and we negotiate. We demand what is rightfully ours, and more. We make him understand the scope of what he's done and the consequences if he doesn't comply. It's a dangerous game, Sarah. It means getting close to him, to the whole operation, again. But it also gives us control. Control. The word resonated deep within me. It was what I had craved for so long, the antithesis of the powerlessness that had defined my interactions with my family.
Control, I repeated, the taste of it suddenly potent on my tongue. I liked the sound of that. The decision was made, swift and brutal. The next day, I received an official-looking letter delivered by courier bearing the insignia of a law firm I didn't recognize, but one Emily assured me was top tier, specializing in white-collar defense. It was a formal summons requesting my presence at my father's estate for an urgent family meeting. The date was set for the following Saturday, precisely a week from then. It was a transparent move, a way to present a united front, to control the narrative before any external forces could intervene. They knew I had something, and they wanted to contain it. The week leading up to the meeting was a silent war of preparation. Emily and I worked tirelessly, meticulously organizing every document, every scrap of evidence. We documented the $175,000 transfer, the bank statements showing its subsequent movement, the trust filings, Davies' testimony, cross-referenced with public records of the overseas industrialist's known business dealings and any suspicious transactions linked to his entities that we could find. We built a case, brick by painstaking brick, designed not just to prove my father's guilt, but to make it undeniable, irrefutable. I spent hours practicing my responses, my questions, my demeanor. I had to be calm, collected, and utterly resolute. The humiliation I had endured had forged me into something new, something harder. The estate felt more imposing than ever as I drove up the familiar winding driveway. The manicured lawns, the stately architecture, it was all a carefully curated image of wealth and respectability, a facade built on a foundation of corruption. As I parked my car, I saw the other vehicles already there. Mark's flashy sports car, my mother's sensible sedan, and, most pointedly, my father's sleek black limousine. They were all waiting. The front door opened before I even reached it, revealing my mother, her face a mask of forced pleasantness. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, darling, we were wondering when you'd arrive. Come in, come in. Your father is waiting in the study." The study, the scene of the initial betrayal, the place where I had first discovered the depths of his deceit. The room was unchanged, the mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, the faint scent of cigar smoke and polished wood. My father sat behind the desk, as always, a figure of authority, his silver hair impeccably styled, his navy suit exuding an aura of quiet power. Mark was there too, lounging in a wingback chair, a smug expression already on his face, his new gold watch glinting under the soft lamplight. My mother hovered near the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Sarah." My father's voice was smooth, controlled, the same voice that had so often delivered lectures on integrity and honor. "Thank you for coming."
Mark and I have been discussing some rather unfortunate misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. The word was a calculated insult. Misunderstandings? I echoed, my voice steady. Or deliberate deceit, Father. The air in the room crackled. Mark shifted in his chair, his smugness faltering slightly. My father's gaze, usually so penetrating, seemed to tighten, a flicker of something akin to surprise crossing his features before it was quickly masked. Your father is referring to the financial matters concerning your inheritance, my mother interjected, her voice a little too high-pitched. We've been concerned about your stress levels, darling. We wanted to ensure you understood the complexities. Complexities? I took a step closer to the desk, my eyes fixed on my father. Or a deliberate siphoning of funds, Father. Funds that were meant for me, but were instead transferred as a payment to Mark. The carefully constructed calm in the room shattered. Mark actually sat up straighter, his jaw slack. My father's hand, which had been resting on his desk, clenched into a fist. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its smooth veneer, replaced by a harder edge. "I'm talking about the $175,000, Father. The money you claimed was an investment in my future, but which you actually transferred directly to Mark, and not as a gift or an investment, as payment. For what? To keep him quiet? To grease the wheels of your operations?" I watched his face, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of humanity. There was none, only anger, and a dawning awareness that his carefully guarded secret was out. "You've been listening at keyholes, Sarah," he spat, his voice laced with venom, "snooping where you don't belong." "I found what you tried so hard to hide," I countered, my voice unwavering. "I found the trust, Father, the anonymous trust, the one holding millions, the one managed by the same private bank that handled the transfer of my money to Mark, the one connected to Mr. Ivan Volkov." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. My father's face went ashen. Mark stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. My mother let out a small, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Volkov, the notorious overseas industrialist. The name was synonymous with power, ruthlessness, and a trail of financial devastation. You don't know what you're talking about," my father stammered, his usual composure crumbling. "Oh, I do," I said, my voice taking on a chilling calm. "I spoke to a Mr. Davies. He was quite informative about your role as a cleaner, about how you facilitated Mr. Volkov's assets, about how my money wasn't even yours to give, but a transaction, a housekeeping payment to keep your operation running smoothly." The accusation hung in the air, a poison dart finding its mark. My father visibly recoiled, as if struck. Mark looked between his father and me, his own greed momentarily eclipsed by the terrifying implications of what was being revealed. "This is slander," my father finally managed to gasp, his face contorted with rage. "You're trying to destroy us." "You destroyed us first, Father," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You built this empire on lies and theft. You sacrificed my future, my trust, my dignity, to protect your secrets and your criminal associates. And you used me, my money, as a bribe, as a payment, to keep a notorious criminal happy." I reached into my briefcase, my movements deliberate, and placed a folder on the desk. It contained copies of the documents, the bank statements, the trust filings, the wire transfers, Davies' signed affidavit. "This," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound authority, "is what you tried to hide. This is the truth." My father's eyes darted to the folder, then back to me, a flicker of panic in their depths. He knew. He knew I had him. "And there's more," I continued, the momentum building. "The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the entire network you've built to launder Volkov's money. I have it all. Emily, my lawyer, has been working with a team to trace every single transaction. We know about the discretionary payments. We know about the invisible operations. We know everything." My mother began to sob, a low, broken sound. Mark remained frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. My father, cornered and exposed, looked suddenly older, his carefully constructed facade irrevocably shattered. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What I want is what's rightfully mine," I said, my voice hardening. "My inheritance, every cent of it, plus compensation for the years of emotional distress, for the stolen opportunities, for the sheer betrayal of trust. And not just for me. The money you diverted from me was part of a larger illicit operation. You owe restitution not just to me, but to society. And if you don't pay, if you don't cooperate, this entire folder, along with everything else we've uncovered, goes straight to the Justice Department, the IRS, and every regulatory body that will have it. And Volkov will know exactly who betrayed him. The threat was delivered with a cold, calculated precision. My father understood the implications. The destruction of his empire, his freedom, his reputation, all of it was on the table. And the thought of Volkov's wrath would have sent shivers down his spine. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years, not as the overlooked daughter, but as a formidable adversary. He saw the strength, the resolve, the unwavering determination that had been forged in the fires of his own betrayal. You're bluffing, he choked out, but there was no conviction in his voice. Am I? I raised an eyebrow, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face.
Emily, would you like to elaborate on the extent of our findings? Emily, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Her presence, professional and unyielding, added another layer of pressure. Mr. Sterling, she began, her voice calm and measured, my team and I have compiled extensive evidence. We have traced the flow of funds from your various offshore entities, corroborated by Mr. Davies' testimony and independent financial forensics. We have identified multiple instances of money laundering and tax evasion directly linked to Mr. Volkov's operations, with you as the primary facilitator. The sums involved are staggering, and the potential penalties are severe. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable. We have also discovered evidence of your use of corporate funds for personal gain, including significant transfers to your son, Mark, that lack legitimate business justification. This is in addition to the fraudulent diversion of your daughter Sarah's inheritance. Mark visibly blanched. My father sank back into his chair, his face a mask of despair. The control he had exerted for so long had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked fear. We are prepared to offer a settlement, Emily continued, her voice softening just slightly, but still carrying the weight of authority. A full and transparent transfer of all assets rightfully belonging to Sarah, including the $175,000 with substantial interest, and an additional sum to acknowledge the years of fraud and manipulation. In return, we agree to an immediate cessation of all legal proceedings and a discrete transfer of certain assets that are clearly identifiable as Sarah's. However, if this offer is not accepted, we will proceed with full disclosure to all relevant authorities, and Mr. Volkov will be informed of the extent of your indiscretions. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs. My father's gaze was fixed on the folder, then on me. The battle was over. He had lost. The years of deception, the carefully constructed image of respectability, had crumbled into dust. Finally he spoke, his voice a broken whisper. What do you want the additional sum to be? I didn't hesitate. Double what you transferred to Mark, plus the original $175,000 with interest and a significant portion of your liquid assets, enough to ensure that neither you nor Mark will ever have to resort to this kind of housekeeping again. The negotiation that followed was swift and brutal. My father, stripped of his power, his dignity, and his secrets, agreed to every demand. The transfer of funds would be initiated immediately. The legal team would draft the necessary documents for signature. It was a complete surrender. As I stood to leave, the weight of years of humiliation finally lifting from my shoulders, I looked at my father. He was a defeated man, a shadow of the powerful figure he once was. You thought you could control everything, Father, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. But you underestimated me. You underestimated the price of betrayal. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving them in the wreckage of their lies. My mother was weeping openly. Mark was a picture of stunned disbelief, his dreams of inheriting his father's tainted fortune dissolving before his eyes. My father sat slumped in his chair, a broken king on his throne of stolen wealth. The drive away from the estate was different this time. The Florida sun felt warm, not mocking. The silence in the car was no longer charged with tension, but with a quiet, profound sense of victory. Emily smiled at me, a genuine, radiant smile. You did it, Sarah. You really did it. I took a deep breath, the air feeling cleaner,
fresher than it had in years. The money was coming, yes, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about shedding the victimhood that had been thrust upon me. It was about proving that even in the face of overwhelming deceit and betrayal, truth, armed with unwavering resolve, could emerge victorious. The past had been a heavy burden, but the future, finally, felt like my own. It was the exhale of a soul finally set free.